Welcome back, Irish fans, to Breaking Down Braves Boys podcast. Today we're going to be talking recruiting with Nathan Erbach from IrishBreakdown.com, a recruiting analyst. We got a specialty guy in there. I also have Luke with me, but Nathan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. Good to be on.
And we finally got Luke back, so Luke, you can say what's up too. So I guess I'll just start it out with something basic. What are your thoughts on every class of 2020 player?
You said 2022 or 2020? Sorry, I couldn't hear you too well.
2020.
2020, yeah. I mean, I think we've kind of spoken off air before a little bit about this. I think the class is a little underrated, at least from a, ranking standpoint. Guys like Matt Zona and Elijah Taylor, I think they're going to be, ready to play at the collegiate level pretty early on. And I think sometimes, fans see that as almost a negative when it comes to a guy that's, not as highly ranked because they think that there's just a floor there and there's no ceiling. But with Taylor specifically, I think that his ceiling is pretty high, especially at the, at the collegiate level. I think he's a guy that when he gets to his senior year, he can be one of the better big men in the ACC. And then with Zona, he's not the most athletic guy, but he can shoot. So that's obviously a huge thing in Bray's offense. If he can, step out of the 3-point line and, make some shots, and then I think by the time he's a senior, he's just going to be a really hard guy to deal with. I mean, he's big. Like I mentioned, he's not the most athletic guy, so you're not going to see him running the floor on the fast break or anything like that. But he's just, I think he's going to rebound sort of how like, Martinez Gavin's probably a pretty good example, for him, or a good comp. So I'm expecting him to, both of those guys to compete early on, but then by the time they're upperclassmen to be really solid. And then with Tony Sanders, he's a guy that he might take a little bit longer to develop, but he brings, an athleticism and just a style of play to the offense that they don't currently have, or at least they don't have enough of. So he might be a guy that redshirts, maybe doesn't play too often as a sophomore, just with all the, the log jam at, where he's sort of going to be at. But by the time he's an upperclassman as well, I mean, he's going to bring an athleticism to the, to the team that they, at least right now, they don't have too much of.
Yeah. And like going off that, the next question is like, we know that like Elijah Taylor and they're both like built for college basketball, but who do you think is going to have like the biggest immediate impact, and then like who's going to have like more building to go off of?
Yeah, with Taylor, I'm intrigued, or I'm interested to see what his actual height is. I haven't seen him in person, but I've heard, he might be closer to like 6'6", 6'7", versus 6'8", 6'9", where he's listed. So if he's closer to that 6'7" range, I'm interested to see if maybe the staff wants to hold off on him just a little bit. But at the same time, I mean, you see him, maybe like a guy like Bonzi Colson would be a good example. He was 6'6", but he had a, wingspan of like 7'2", 7'3", so it didn't really make too much of a deal, or, people didn't really care as much because he was getting rebounds, he was making shots, whatever. But I would probably lean towards Zona. I think he has more of the natural height. I think he has a little bit better feel for around the basket. So if they're taking out, Jawan Durham and, and they need a rest, I'm not completely sure he's going to be a guy that can have, like a 30 minute per game, like Mooney was last year. So no, I would probably lean towards Zona year one. But I think Taylor has a little bit higher upside.
Would you think it's fair to say that Zona could develop more as a post scorer over the years? Because right now it doesn't seem like he's that guy. He's more of a stretch big right now.
Yeah, you know what? I think he actually has a pretty good low post presence already. I mean, I know like when you look at film, it's really hard because they only like to show things that guys, or that fans want to see, and the coaches are able to get their hands on, more quality film. So one thing I've tried to do when I look at stuff is I like to look at full games. So I broke down, like, for example, Blake Wesley. I know we'll get into him here later, but, I started watching full games of him instead of just huddle films or, max prep films, whatever you're looking at. So no, I actually think Zona is a guy that can, come in and contribute down low right away. kind of like maybe a Rob Kurz. I know you guys are maybe a little young for Kurz, but that's kind of the guy I kind of think of when I think of Matt Zona.
So segueing into Blake Wesley, like you said, Luke and I have watched a lot of him too. We watched the JR game, a couple others too. What are your thoughts about his game, or do you have any updates about his recruitment?
So I was actually able to talk with him and his dad probably 3 weeks ago now. That was more of a human interest piece type of story. I didn't, at this point, he's not really ready to, make a commitment or anything like that. So I know he's probably, he's bugged all the time by people. So one thing I try to pride myself on is not getting on these kids all the time and just hitting them up when, for recruiting questions and stuff like that. But his game, I mean, obviously he's an athlete. Look at the Tony Sanders, how I described him. He's another guy that can come in and just provide something they don't really have right now. He can shoot it a little bit. I don't think he's going to be like a 40% shooter at the college level, but I do think he's a quality shooter. But with his athleticism and how he can get to the basket, he doesn't necessarily need to be. If he's a 35% guy, but can also slash and dish and play good D, then, that's something that they need. And, he's a top 100 prospect, and they need more of those guys because they haven't really landed them here in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I remember watching a couple of videos in the past, and he keeps saying that he really struggles that he's working defense, and that'll be really good for the Braves system.
Yeah, so his defense is actually something I think is pretty underrated. He's a guy, and I think that's what you said. I did cut out for a second, but no, I mean, I think he could turn into one of those guys that, by the time he's a junior, senior, he's an all ACC defender, first team defender, possibly, just depending on how he develops. But I think that's a really underrated part of his game. And I think that's something that can really take him far, at the collegiate level. But at the same time, I don't think he's going to be like a 3-and-D guy, or someone that's only going to score 5-6 points a game, and like a Pfluger, I guess. I don't see him in a Rex Pfluger where he's just going to do everything, pretty good, nothing great, but then obviously be a terrific defender. I think he's a guy that can give you 15, 15 and 7 or something like that. But also play, really quality defense.
Yeah. So do you think that they don't need to play? Will Bray go after any more 21 guys?
I've heard some rumblings that they might want to take a big man if possible. And we know that Bray in the past is, he's not shy of going after a guy in the spring that develops. I mean, obviously, Tony Sanders is a good example of that. Matt Farrell, great example of that. So I think if they can find someone in the spring, that is a legitimate big man, I wouldn't be surprised. With COVID and stuff like that going on, that might be a little bit more difficult, to see how guys develop. But just with the transfer portal now these days too, you don't necessarily have to do that as much. I mean, they could probably easily find someone that's, willing to come in and compete, especially with Durham, going to be gone. I mean, obviously they have Zona, Taylor, coming in, but I don't think that's going to really shy away from guys that can come in and be a grad transfer immediately and play.
Yeah, agreed.
So we're still on 2021. I wanted to ask you, this wasn't a question, but have you watched a lot of Blake AAU games lately? I know those aren't the best, but it seems like he's developed a little more into a full offensive player more than just a shooter, and it seems like he's passing a lot better from what I've seen. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know what? I haven't watched too much. I've seen some highlights here and there, and like I said, I talk to his dad every now and then. And that's kind of where I brought up the whole 35% from three. Is when you look at his college or when you look at his high school tape, he does shoot a lot. He's a high volume guy, and I think even for South Bend Riley, he maybe shoots too much just because of he's obviously very clearly one of the better guys on that team, if not the best player. So I wanted him to do that more often, slash, pass, whatever, because I think those are more, I think those are strengths of his that will develop better at the college level than maybe his shot will. Just the very limited stuff I've seen here in the last, couple weeks, I'm pretty happy about that for sure.
It seems like he's a lot better of a passer with more talented guys around him, like Michi Johnson and Caleb First. But yeah, you were right. I think he definitely did shoot a little much at Riley, especially in the game against JR where he took like 35 shots and had like 30.
Right. No, and like you said, I mean, when you're passing to Caleb First or something like that, I mean, you're gonna a down low presence like that's going to Purdue, and obviously Notre Dame wanted him. So no, I mean, it helps a lot when you got players around you.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to class of 2022, are there any guys that you really like in that class, or what do you think about Mike Bray's approach in that class?
You know, it's always weird. Notre Dame basketball recruiting is just so much different than, for example, football, or even just other college basketball programs. I mean, you see on Twitter all the time, you know, these guys are just getting offers right and left, especially with the contact period happening. And then Notre Dame's only offered, 3 guys so far, and they probably have a decent shot with, 1.5 of them. I don't really see them being a guy that or a player for Jarvis Walker out of IMG. I haven't heard too much about him. And then even with like Prince Aligbe, he's a guy that I think is a really nice fit at Notre Dame. Outside of talking to his coach here in the last few weeks, I haven't really heard anything with Notre Dame there, but I mean, I think he'd be a tremendous fit and someone that the staff would really, like to have. Right now, I would say Donovan Clingan is probably their best bet, just based off my conversations with them and then kind of just looking around at, who they're talking to the most. But actually, I think some of the guys that they have the best shots with are, guys that they haven't offered. JJ Starling out of New York, who's now going to be playing in Indiana, only 45 minutes away from Notre Dame's campus. That's really nice. I believe their head coach is a former Notre Dame, what was he, a manager, I believe, at Notre Dame for a little bit. And so it's always nice to have. And I like the fact that they are in on him prior to him going to that program, because they haven't had much success with guys that have been there, for their entire, prep careers. Other guys, I mean, I think Braden Huff is a kid that can really develop here in the next couple of years. I just got off the phone yesterday with Kyle Filipowski. He's another kid that I think if they end up offering that, they have a legitimate chance with. But no, I mean, they're just taking it slow. I mean, you guys know Mike Bray, he really wants to get to know a player. And he really only offers kids that he feels like he has a legitimate chance with. So maybe I should preface the offers that they do have with guys that, maybe they do have a legitimate chance with Walker and, Aligbe and Clingan. But at least as of right now, it seems like they might have some more traction with some of the guys they haven't officially offered.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that we actually – I know you talk about this like before, a legitimate like chance with some of these like top 50 players, because like I know my favorite player in that class right now is like JJ Starling, just because he's like a crazy shooter. And so like just like wondering like what you're thinking about that.
Well, you know what? Starling fits the profile of guys that they typically get. So I think if they offer, I think they actually really legitimately have a chance there. I mean, you guys can look at the classes they've had in the last, 5-6 years. They don't typically have trouble finding guards that can shoot. And specifically from the area of the country that he is, I mean, or where he's from. I mean, Northeast kids typically, especially, with Mike Bray being a DeMatha guy, I mean, obviously they've had success at that program, but, just look around. I mean, Zach August from Massachusetts, Pat Connaughton's from that area. Grant's obviously, DeMatha kid. So, I mean, they tend to do well with those guys. I'm not exactly sure why they do better with those guys than, maybe Indiana. I mean, obviously Demetrius Jackson was a guy they got from Indiana and, it was successful, but no, I mean, Starling just fits the profile. I mean, I don't know how his academics are, but just everything I've heard about him, obviously they think he's like the best shooter in the class. I've heard that off and on. And, those are guys they do well with. Another guy would be like Aiden Braccia from California. Not sure how close they are to offering him, but, he's a great kid. I've talked to him several times. He's been to campus like 6 or 7 times. He gets to campus pretty much every year for a football game. So obviously the interest is there with him. And he has some programs on. I mean, Stanford hasn't offered yet, but their program, Santa Clara, So I mean, he has, he's watched Trey Wirtz and Cormac Ryan play, and obviously I think he's pretty intrigued by the way they play and can, how he can contribute to Notre Dame if he ends up getting that offer. So, guys like Starling and Bracci, I think are I wouldn't say shoo-ins for Notre Dame if they get the offer, but certainly kids to look out for if they do.
Oh yeah.
Bracci is a guy that I have also talked to. He told me, like you said, he's a Notre Dame fan. He was telling me about how he really used to like Matt Farrell and guys like that. And he watched that video that I made about them and he said that was a good comparison or whatever. But like you said, I think they have a really good chance with him. So which guy do you think is your favorite in the 2022 class? I know Luke likes JJ. I like Prince a lot because he's completely different from everybody they have. But what would you say about that?
I mean, I think it's hard to go wrong with Klingon. They don't typically get guys like him, 7-footer that can, pretty much do it all. I know he's been working on his 3-point shot as well. So if he can develop that into something that's, is pretty impressive, and hard to guard. So I think at least out of the guys that they've offered, that's definitely a guy. Hard to go wrong with what, you're saying about JJ Starling. If they actually believe he's the best shooter in the class, then, that's big. I have a little bit of a bias towards Braccia just because he's definitely been the guy that I've connected with the most. I'm not sure how, like I said, I'm not sure how quickly they'll offer him, but I think he's just like you said, a Matt Farrell type that might be underrated, but he's going to come in and, by the time he leaves, he'd be a fan favorite. So I gravitate towards him definitely. So yeah, I think those are some of the guys, at least that I've talked to. Kyle Filipowski too. I watched his film a little bit yesterday after I spoke with him, and I think he has a really high upside and a kid that can pretty much do it all on the basketball court. So I don't have a specific answer for you, but those are definitely some of the guys.
Yeah.
Kyle,
go ahead.
Oh, got said to Kyle, he's been getting a ton of offers from like big schools for basketball.
Yeah, he's another kid. I mean, he's unranked right now, pretty much on every website. So, but obviously you look at his offer list, that doesn't seem like it's going to stand for too long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he compared himself to a mix of Kevin Durant and Kevin Love for the viewers. I see all of that too.
I mean, he's legitimately 6'10", 6'11", so I mean, I can see it for sure.
Yeah. So how much you not having to train with the team hurt the class of 2020 and guys that were going to take a big jump and lead the team?
Obviously that hurts, but every program's going through it, so it's not a huge excuse. But I think it kind of goes back to, you look at guys like Matt Zona. Sorry, my dog just was doing something real quick. But you look at guys like Matt Zona and Taylor. I mean, I don't think that those are guys that necessarily need to be on campus, to come in and contribute. I think they're hard workers. They're guys that are probably talking to Bray, all the time. I guess where it hurts the most is, like you said, with the leadership aspect. I mean, Cormac Ryan, Trey Wirtz are new guys on campus. Obviously, Trey Wirtz is going to sit out, for this next season. So I guess in that regard, it doesn't, not a huge deal. But getting Cormac Ryan to, sort of mesh with those guys even more so in some scrimmages, even though he's been there for a year. And then just the fact that they lost 3 of their seniors who were their 3 seniors. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to just get those guys to, it's more than just off the court. You need to be a leader on the court, and it's tough to show that when you can't be together. So, I mean, I would say that's probably the biggest thing right now.
Mm-hmm. Do you think they'll have, how do I say this? Do you think they'll make up for time once they get there in August, if that's still the plan? Do you think it'll be tough for them?
No, I mean, it's Notre Dame. I mean, I hate to say that in a cocky way, but, I think that, they better prepare their players, just because of the type of players that they bring in. I mean, they're high quality kids, on and off the court. And, I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily towards other programs. But that's kind of what makes Notre Dame special. Those kids are high academic kids. They're, they come from, the majority of the time they come from families that, that just really care during their prep careers, outside of just basketball. So, I mean, you see it even with the football team right now. I mean, obviously they had one kid test for COVID and nobody else did, and they're already back to normal. And they're one of the only schools that had that. So, I mean, I think that really shows that those kids bought in to what the coaching staffs were saying. And I think that that's exactly what the basketball team's doing. I think that they're, honestly, probably, I guess we didn't really get into this, but those guys are probably already playing and working out together as long as they're all healthy. So I could see, I see them probably maybe even having an edge over some of the other programs that are out there.
So getting off of the current team, this is a guy we're both really high on, Luke and I. I think you are too. What would your thoughts be on J.R. Konieczny? Would you say he could contribute immediately? What's your overall outlook on him?
Yeah, the only thing with JR, I mean, he's still slender. He's a kid that, I mean, you look at his freshman year to now, I mean, he's obviously really developed. I mean, I think I said this a couple weeks ago, but you look at his freshman film, he wasn't dunking. His shot was like right at the 3-point line or sometimes not even. You look at his sophomore film, he starts dunking a little bit, and then he starts going a little bit beyond the 3-point line. And then his junior film, I mean, pretty much every time he's down low, he's dunking and, making highlight reel plays. And then, he's shooting from like well beyond even the 3-point line in college. So he's definitely developed both of those, parts of his game. And he's just a really good athlete, very underrated athlete, actually. You look at a guy like him versus Wesley. Wesley's, kind of heralded as, the athlete that he is. But I would maybe take JR, especially with the size that he brings. I think he's actually a guy that might be closer to 6'7", 6'8" by the time he reaches, South Bend. So, or I should say Notre Dame since he's from South Bend. But, but yeah, no, I mean, the only thing I'd worry about with him is weight room. So I'm hesitant to say he's going to necessarily compete, as a freshman. At the same time, I mean, I think he has just a really developed game even for that. And, he still has a full year of, weight room, basketball to play before he gets there. So I wouldn't put it past him. But that's really the only thing for me with him. But then, once he's a sophomore, junior, senior, I think he's going to be really special.
Yeah.
How far away do you think he would be from being in what you need him, like his weight? How far do you think he's away? Well,
to a certain extent, weight's overrated. When I say slender, I just think he looks pretty thin. I mean, obviously 6'7", 6'7", if you're 185, that's pretty skinny, I guess. So, I mean, if you can get him over 200 pounds by the time he gets to Notre Dame, that would obviously be nice. But, I just want to see what he looks like built-wise. I mean, everybody has a different build. I mean, you look at Chet Holmgren from in the 2022 class or whatever, or the 2021 class. I mean, that kid's as light as it gets, but he's the number 2 prospect in the country. So I guess it's not the end all be all. And you see college basketball kids all the time come in and, compete when they're still, I guess, for lack of a better word, not completely built. But no, I mean, I would say at least if he can be in there like if he can be like 210 or so, and look like a healthy 210, then, I think that's probably where the coaching staff would really like him to be at that time.
And then going back to JJ Stein, do you think him moving to like La Lumiere gives us like an edge at landing him?
I mean, I don't think it hurts. I mean, I think we've seen where, it's one of those things where Bray, I mean, I think one of the knocks on Bray is that when it comes to, recruiting, he doesn't necessarily get out on the trail. And when I say that, I mean, he's not necessarily leaving the state. So for 2021, he offered 3 Indiana kids. Hopefully he lands 2 of them. And he obviously, he was intrigued by some other guys and never offered. But, him moving, 45 minutes away, it's obviously just easier access. Yeah. Kid wants to come up for an official visit. A non-official visit, he can do that a lot easier. So I don't think it hurts at all. I think some people look at, La Lumiere and they're like, well, I mean, they've never gotten a kid from there. That's not really a program that, they've had success with. But I also think that that's somewhat overrated. And if the kid likes Notre Dame, the kid's going to like Notre Dame. If he doesn't like Notre Dame, he's not going to like Notre Dame. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope it gives him courage.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't hurt. I mean, I don't think no one can really spin that to me at least and say, oh, that's a negative for Notre Dame. I mean, he's going to be significantly closer than he was. So,
do you think him going there helps us with Kamari Lands at all? I know they've talked to him. He was the number one player in 8th grade, I'm pretty sure, in the country.
Right. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't hurt. I don't know how well they know each other. That's another thing. They might not. I mean, just because you play on the same basketball team doesn't mean you're necessarily close. I would probably lean towards no. I mean, I don't think, especially in basketball, I've noticed a lot of kids don't necessarily go to the same school just because they play prep ball together. That seems to be a little bit more of a football thing, at least from my, knowledge. So, no, I mean, I would probably say if kind of the same thing. If Kamari's interested in Notre Dame, then Kamari's going to be interested in Notre Dame. If Starling ends up, committing to Notre Dame, I don't think it's going to be that much of a like a shoe-in point for Lands.
So back to the bigger picture, you kind of talked about this a little bit, but do you think the Bray can't recruit narrative is a little overblown? I think Luke and I both do, based on like the guys he's talking to. They can only talk to about 10% of them because of grades and all that.
Yeah, I mean, do I think he's the most active coach on the trail? No. But at the same time, I do think part of that is like what you're saying. I think he is active with the kids that he wants. And I think that, Belanis, for example, I think he's a really good recruiter. And then Ayers and Humphrey, I think, have been really solid additions to the coaching staff, even if it hasn't necessarily been seen in recruiting since they got brought on. So, I definitely, the whole message board troll. Yeah. I don't like to get into all that kind of stuff because there's just, there's just a lot of negative fans out there. Just like there is probably a lot of positive fans in a way, I guess, if that makes sense. So, there seems to never be there's never a middle ground there. So, I've been critical of Bray in the past to a certain extent. I will say the biggest thing for me is I think that every year they should be able to land, top 50 to top 100 guys. And, a couple of years ago when they didn't land a single kid, I thought that they could have done a better job there of, at least having a backup option to guys like Isaiah Stewart. So, in that aspect, I think that he deserved a little bit of criticism. But overall, I mean, I definitely think it's an overrated claim.
Yeah.
It seems like they're going after Blake Wesley like harder than any other school right now. They're always brought up first when they ask him who's going hard at you. Do you think that's fair too, that they really go – well, like you said, they go after the guys they want really hard, but not everybody?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a lot different than football. If in football, you need to have backup options. And you have 85 scholarships. There's just so many kids out there. But in basketball, I mean, what do you have, like 12 scholarships? So I mean, you can only offer so many guys, especially if those guys actually want to come. So what's the point in offering the 3 guys that you would take after Blake Wesley if that's going to make him feel like a kid that's not necessarily your top target? I guess Jordan Hawkins would be a good example of that. I mean, I think a lot of people thought that Notre Dame should have offered him. He's a DeMatha kid, probably has some interest, but they have Blake Wesley in their backyard, and at least as of right now, he's not showing that he's gonna, he's showing the love back, I guess, to Notre Dame. So. And especially I don't know if you guys are going to get into this at all, but especially in like recent weeks. I mean, for a while, I thought he might have been trending away. But it just in recent weeks, maybe the last couple months even, it just seems like, Notre Dame has sort of even picked up their pursuit of him, and he's showing that back. I mean, he's the only school that he's really talked about going on an official visit to so far. And like you mentioned, just every time, recruiting's brought up with him, Notre Dame's the first school he mentions. So I think they're in really good shape.
Yeah, that's big time. So my question is, what do you think the 2020 and 2021 record will be? As your prediction?
That's tough, man. I tend to lean sort of similar to this past season. Obviously they lost a lot. Mooney, one of the best ACC, one of the best players in the ACC. Gibbs had a bounce back season, and then Pfluger was just, kind of that core guy. from a leadership standpoint and just doing everything right on the court. So it's going to be tough to replace all three. And if they can't get a guy in there that's going to, help Jawan Durham, that will make it even more tough. So if those freshmen can't get in there, or Laz can't necessarily be the 5 around, like the 4 round 1 look, and Laz is your 5, then it can be tough. So I would probably say somewhere around like that 20 and 12, somewhere around there. But maybe some more high quality wins now that those guys are, getting in there. I mean, even last year, it seemed like all the tough wins, or all the tough teams, they ended up, just barely losing.
Yeah.
So they didn't have necessarily the resume to be a tournament team, but I could see them being 20 and 12, 21 and 11, whatever. But with maybe just a slightly better resume, because they come out on top on some of those bigger games.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, I think they will get some more bigger wins, especially having like Cormac Ryan, who can create his own shot at the end of the game, or Nate's older now. He's already clutch. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with Bray is guys develop as juniors, and especially big men. So, I mean, I'm really looking at Laz to, take that next step. But even outside of him, Prentice Hub, if he can just get a little bit more consistent when it comes to, I guess, playmaking, turned the ball over a few times last year in crucial. I know in that Syracuse game, you kind of let, you let the other guys on, you let the Syracuse players get the best of them a little bit. I think they ended up winning that. That was the one that they ended up winning anyway. But, just certain things like that, if you can kind of control that a little bit, that'd be nice. And then Dane Goodwin, I think, is already kind of there. I mean, he might get a little bit better, but he's just kind of one of those solid guys. I think he's just, he is what he is. And then getting Carmody back is a huge deal. If he can stay healthy. I mean, he's obviously, he was right up there with those guys from a recruiting standpoint. So, no, I mean, that junior leap for a lot of these guys, I don't think that's being talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I think Nate could have a huge leap. He might even have a higher ceiling than Mooney. Not saying he's going to make that leap that Mooney did, because that was absurd, but he's probably more athletically gifted. He's a better shooter, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think from like you said, a ceiling standpoint, I don't think there's any question that Laz might have a better ceiling. It wouldn't surprise me if after his senior year, he gets drafted, just because he can shoot, he can drive. He's an athletic kid. Mooney was more of a, he would shoot the 3, but if he wasn't going to sit there and, take the ball from the perimeter and ask you for a dunk or something like that. And I think Laz sort of has that, sort of a VJ Beacham is sort of who I compare him to a certain extent. Where I guess early on in his career, he was kind of a 3-and-D guy. And I'm not saying Laz is a 3-and-D guy, but just from a development standpoint in terms of driving from the perimeter, I think Laz can, certainly do that at an effective level here in the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. We definitely saw that this year, especially at the end of the year, especially in that like Wake Forest game. He was taking it to the basket the whole game.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So that's all we got. Any final words? You want to plug the website a little bit?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously irishbreakdown.com. I've recently started there as the lead basketball recruiting analyst. So, obviously I know your fans want to check out your website, but hopefully they can check out both.
Yeah, Joey and I get a lot of our news from you, so make sure everyone watches that and reads.
So, yeah, that's all we got. Check out irishbreakdown.com. While you're at it, check out our website, Breaking Down Braves Boys. But that's all we got. Thanks, Nathan, for coming on. Thanks, Luke, for coming back. We'll get you on more. And hopefully we can make this a semi-regular thing, talk about recruiting. So that's going to be it. Peace.
Awesome, guys. Appreciate it.